Escape the United Kingdom before it's too late. Today I wanted to share the perspective of one of our British clients, why he left the United Kingdom and what led to his decision. Great Britain, once a global superpower and successful imperium, is struggling with some of the modern day's challenges. More specifically, challenges of the 21st century. I received this email from our British client, and I'm going to read this email to you and tell you exactly the reasons why he left Great Britain. He says the following: Keir Starmer's policies are proving to be disastrous for the future of the United Kingdom. He goes on, his unwavering commitment to increasing taxation, overregulating businesses and pushing extreme climate policies is strangling economic growth. The climate agenda that's going on, not just in the UK, but across the entire continent of Europe, and most heavily in Western Europe, is pushing a big problem onto its citizens. With the implementation of this new transition from conventional energy sources to green energy sources, European governments are making the lives much harder for everyday citizens. Our client goes on. He has more to say about Keir Starmer. He says the following: his open border stance is worsening the already out-of-control immigration crisis, putting pressure on public services and housing. As we're seeing this global phenomenon taking place, and it's probably not for the better of the citizens, legal residents of the country of the United Kingdom. However, open border policies are pushing lots of migration into the UK, and naturally more resources are being used to accommodate the migrants that arrive in the UK. Housing shortages are all too common in the Western world these days. Because of open border policies, the housing crisis has really deepened, making the lives of everyday citizens very difficult. Affordable housing is nearly impossible for British citizens working middle-class jobs. And let's not even talk about the working class that's been suffering the most. He goes on, meanwhile, his dedication to advancing digital surveillance and online censorship is further eroding civil liberties. This is something completely new across the Western Hemisphere, which literally started during the past crisis, where very developed Western nations, including Canada, the UK, pushed for some extreme policies that penalized actions that were not penalized before. Needless to say, people are scared about expressing their opinion, not only online but also publicly offline. He says, under Starmer's leadership, the UK is on a fast track to economic ruin and authoritarian control. In my opinion, obviously, Starmer dislikes the British national identity, or he wouldn't be putting these policies in place in the first place. I think this goes without saying. Everything has a reason. It's really interesting what our client has to say about the government of the UK right now. Here's what he says. He says, the government's blatant disregard for democratic processes is alarming. Local consultations are ignored and representatives are unresponsive. Facial recognition technology is expanding with cameras tracking every store entrance and self-checkout. Now, we've heard a very similar story from another client who also was so kind to write us an email last year where they illustrated some of the biggest problems that they see across the United Kingdom. And this client also emphasizes the increase that he is seeing right now in terms of facial recognition technology taking place, being fully implemented in the United Kingdom. He says free speech is under threat with new laws criminalizing dissenting opinions online. Another big point that our client makes, and I'm going to read this section here in a moment, is about taxation. Now, it is true that taxation is very burdensome in the United Kingdom right now. While living costs have skyrocketed, tax burdens have increased simultaneously. He says the UK's taxation system has become nothing short of robbery. With tax thresholds frozen until 2028, working people are being pushed into higher tax bands without realizing it. A stealth tax that punishes hard work. It's very common that the more money you make, the more taxes you pay. He says capital gains taxes allowances have been slashed. and there are even whispers that inheritance taxes could rise. You see, you're getting fewer benefits and taxes increase. And how can you afford life under these conditions? It's very difficult. It's difficult to impossible, which is why we've been stressing a lot on our channel that the middle class is going away. And one of the best ways for you to preserve your status in the middle class is by relocating to a low-cost country with lower taxes. It makes an interesting statement here. Meanwhile, the state pension remains one of the lowest in Europe, and now politicians are considering means testing it, essentially penalizing those of us who have contributed diligently for decades. Now imagine this. You have been paying into this British pension pot, into this British system that you thought would take care of you for the rest of your life. Well, guess what? Things are about to change. In fact, things are changing right now. Even the once reliable winter fuel allowance has been stripped away for many, leaving pensioners more vulnerable than ever. Now we're going to talk about infrastructure, something that's been crumbling across the Western Hemisphere. Why? There's just not enough money to invest in improving today's infrastructure. The money's being used for things that are more needed than infrastructure. You can always fix the infrastructure later, but if you have other more burning issues, then naturally that's where the money goes first. And if there's any money left over, you're going to spend the money on the things that are important, but not as important as the top priorities of a country. I think we can all agree to this. He says here, it's impossible to ignore the decay in the UK's infrastructure. It's very interesting because you wouldn't think that this is the case until you hear the story of someone with first-hand experience currently living in the United Kingdom. He says roads are riddled with potholes, drains remain clogged, and basic public services are in decline. I've seen better maintained streets in developing nations. Yet, while our local infrastructure is neglected, the government miraculously finds billions to send abroad. You can all imagine where the money goes. It's not going to the things the British citizens value. He says something very, very shocking here about public transportation. He says public transportation is an utter disaster, shockingly expensive, unreliable, and only remotely adequate in London. He says high streets and shopping malls are becoming ghost towns as businesses collapse under financial pressures. Something we have already touched briefly on is the climate agenda and how it's been affecting the lives of everyday citizens. The obsession with climate policies is another significant issue. He says farmers are being driven out of business, land is being repurposed for so-called rewilding, and the push for electric cars and heat pumps is unrealistic and costly. And this issue doesn't just exist across the UK, it's a very, very common issue in the European Union as well. The cost of living is one of the biggest reasons why British expats leave the United Kingdom. I mean, we're all attached to our native countries and we love our native countries. And I'm sure if you are from the UK, you love the UK. At least you love what the UK stood for. Before, a lot of people want to leave their native countries because they no longer feel in alignment with what their country stands for. Why? Values have changed. But one of the biggest reasons is certainly the cost of living in the UK that's been driving out citizens like never before. People can't afford life. Naturally, if you have a pension or some kind of location independent income, you want to live in a place where you get more bang for the buck. Here's what he says about the cost of living crisis. It's no secret that the UK has the highest energy costs in Europe. Food prices have skyrocketed despite the media's claims of low single-digit inflation numbers. Interesting. The reality is that essential items have doubled in price over the last 2 years. Everyday expenses from clothing to entertainment have become exorbitant. Another quick note here on immigration. Countries need immigration. We need legal immigration to fill labor shortages, right? That's how our nations were built in the first place, right? Through immigrants. That's how we did it. And he points out many areas in the UK no longer resemble the country I grew up in. In some regions, particularly in the Midlands, the population is overwhelmingly migrant, with cultural shifts that make locals feel like strangers in their own lands. In the private conversation, he argued that the UK needs more diversified, more skilled immigration and less uncontrolled migration. Now, our British client, he left the United Kingdom, obtained residency in Paraguay, and he's now living the best life ever because he can finally afford a lifestyle that means something to him. And I think that's important, especially if you're already older and if you want to retire, you don't want to live on what you couldn't get by back home. You don't want to be in a situation where you have to get by on 60% that did not meet your expectations back home. You'd rather use the 60% of the money that you have and move to a low-cost country where you get double, triple, or quadruple the purchasing power. And that's exactly what he did. Here's what he's got to say about moving to Paraguay and getting residency in Paraguay. He says, the process was smooth and professional from start to finish, and I'm now relieved to have a solid plan B away from the increasing instability in the UK. Our client used our services to get residency in Paraguay, and thank you very much. If you're watching this video, thank you so much for choosing us. We truly appreciate you, and we are very glad to hear that everything worked out fine for you. Having officially obtained my Paraguay residency, I can now breathe easier knowing that I have an alternative to the UK's ever worsening situation. Let me share some of the reasons why leaving was the best decision I've made. And he goes on here about Paraguay, because now we're done talking about the UK. Let's talk about some of the benefits of living in Paraguay. Paraguay offers everything the UK is failing to provide. He says low taxes, a stable economy, and personal freedom. Unlike the UK, Paraguay has strict immigration policies that protect its national identity and economy, which is true. I'm making this video from Paraguay. I'm talking to you from Asunción, Paraguay, and I'm in complete agreement with what he has to say. He goes on, the cost of living is affordable, allowing residents to enjoy a high standard of life without being overburdened by excessive taxation. This is also true. Paraguay has a maximum personal income tax rate of 10%. So no matter how much money you make, you're never going to pay more than 10% in personal income taxes. On top of that, you have a lot of deductions, further reducing the legal tax burden that you have to the Paraguayan government. He says there are no stealth taxes, no crushing inheritance taxes, and no need to prove economic solvency to gain residency. All of this is true, especially the part of the economic solvency. You don't have to prove income to get residency in Paraguay. He says the government is focused on growth, which is also true. This is a very pro-capitalistic government. And he says, and the country is on an upward trajectory, making it one of the best places to secure a future. The weather is significantly better than the grey, damp climate of the UK. And there's a sense of optimism and opportunity here that simply doesn't exist back home. Again, this is something that I can personally testify. The weather here is a lot better than in the UK, where it rains a lot, where you have very little summer during a given year. Now here in Paraguay, you have a lot of summer, you have a lot of sunshines, and most importantly, the people are warm and friendly, and you have a lot of smiles. More people are waking up to the reality that staying in the UK is a financial and personal liability, and I encourage anyone considering a move to seriously look at Paraguay as an option. Thanks to Nomad Elite, I now have a viable escape route in Paraguay. The quality of life here is fantastic, the tax system is fair, and the personal freedoms are respected. I generally encourage more Brits to consider this path before it's too late. Thank you once again for your professionalism and expertise. You've made my transition seamless, and I couldn't be more satisfied with my decision. Now, this is the email. You have two distinct options now. We make our own beds and we have to lie in them. Option number one, you keep doing what you've always been doing. You're going to stay in the UK. You're going to pray day in and day out for things to change, for things to get better, and hopefully things will get better. This is a very realistic, very normal, very fair, very okay option. Chances of things getting better are slim to none, especially if you want to retire and say you want to spend your golden years, the last 20 to 30 years of your life, in a country that's on an upward trend. If that's what you want, then perhaps staying is not the best of options. Staying is also not the best of options if you cannot get by on your current monthly income. If you couldn't get by on 100% of what you earned pre-retirement, what makes you think that you're going to get by on 60% when you retire? So one of the best things you can do is move to an emerging country like Paraguay. And Paraguay is not third world. I'm here in Asunción, and Asunción is not third world at all. If you look at the shopping malls, if you look at how this place is improving every single year while keeping costs low, while keeping taxes low at the same level, you will see exactly what I'm talking about. My recommendation is for you to come here, check it out. And again, Paraguay is just one option. You can consider Panama, Argentina, Paraguay, couple other countries, and all of these countries are much cheaper than the UK. If you're interested in relocating from the United Kingdom, leaving the collapsing UK for a much better country in Latin America, please book a consultation with us today. You should see our website link displayed on the screen. Go to nomadelite.com and book a consultation with us today. We look forward to talking to you, advising you on the best possible option for your life situation. Thank you so much for watching Nomad Elite. We truly appreciate your attendance, and we look forward to welcoming you to Latin America.